Our guest today on the Mental Toughness podcast, two-time world champion. This is Champ, holding WBC featherweight world title and the IFBA super bantamweight world title. She captured multiple regional featherweight championships belts along her climb as well, cementing herself as one of the true pioneers in the modern women's fight game. There's not many fighters that are out there that can attest to her road of traveled. Her journey started in the Bronx, Irish Mexican parents, and she has fought her way. She earned the nickname the real Million Dollar Baby, not from marketing, but from reality. She was the main sparring partner for Hilary Swank during the preparation of Million Dollar Baby. That role also brought her into public eye, but showed that she was also the real thing. Over 30 professional wins, 33 professional wins, more than a dozen knockouts, championship belts across all divisions. She's not just a fighter, she is a voice, a mentor, an advocate, and leader in the sport. She coaches fighters, has commentated major bouts, broken on resilience and her own story of adversity, survival, and come back to champion women and empower the next generation. Our guest today, excited about this conversation, Maureen Shea. Maureen, champ, thanks for joining us.
And thank you so much for having me. Thank you for that beautiful intro. I really appreciate that.
I'm glad we got to meet. I don't believe in coincidences, as I know you don't. We met at the Blue Ocean Summit, and then hearing you speak, I'm like, this is somebody I need to have on the podcast. Let me start with this. I always want to start like, so growing up, your brother's 10 years older than you. Your Irish and Mexican heritage. Um, it was rough growing up, especially in Brooklyn. But I mean, what about their identity then at that piece?
So it was the Bronx.
I'm sorry,
I
man. The
trained in
Bronx, I
Brooklyn.
really
Everybody
screwed that
does that.
up.
People do that. I'm like,
You
but us
trained you
borough
trained out of
people,
Brooklyn then, right?
yes, yes.
Okay.
The
All right.
the borough people take that very seriously.
Yeah, you're right. The Bronx.
Yeah. It was challenging in that I think mostly because my brother and I are so different, and I was really like my own person. My dad used to always say you march to the beat of your own drum. And so I can start with that was I think that was the now looking back, I think that was where the I really felt mostly like different was with my brother because I noticed the difference in personalities. And my brother moved out when I was 14. He actually moved to Florida, where I now reside in South Florida. So he moved out here when I was 14 because he became a pharmacist. And so then I became almost like an only child. But growing up in the Bronx, there weren't many Mexicans and a lot of Irish, Italian, other Latin cultures like Puerto Rican, Dominican. But my mom worked for the airlines, so that during that time you could fly for free if you're a family member. So I would fly to Mexico since I was 9 months. 9 months old. I would go to Mexico twice a year. My mother and my father really wanted me to be submerged in the language and the culture in Mexico. So thankfully, my mom and my dad did that, and I went to school in Mexico. I did sixth grade there in the summer when I was 12, and Spanish. I don't remember which language I learned first, Mexican Spanish or English. So I've kind of gone along and I speak fluent Spanish. And so coming back to the States and being experiencing both cultures is really interesting for me and quite the experience. But coming back and then speaking Spanish and then looking the way that I do, everybody and speaking English the way that I do. I had a very heavy Bronx accent when I was younger. So people were like, "You're Mexican, you're Spanish?" Like, and then I speak Spanish and it was just like this whole thing. So I always felt different. That was probably something that really stuck with me throughout my entire life, even till today, always feeling different. But back then, I didn't know if it was a good thing.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, great setup. I mean, so and I think you and I were about like we were similar in this aspect. Like if there was a chance to have a party, like we were having a party,
Oh
right? Like I
yeah.
mean, I was doing that, like
Oh
growing
yeah.
up. And I mean, there's a lot of pain that I experienced early on in my life that when you have displaced anger that's going on, right? It needs to find an
Yes.
outlet. So like,
Yes.
but when you're 17, 18, before boxing actually started, I mean, you had low self-esteem, you had this inner rage,
Hmm.
and then you're in an abusive relationship.
Hmm.
And you have a really good quote that I wrote down. I saved this one. You said, "When you give it away, it's easier to get it back, but when it's taken away from you, it's harder to get back." I was
Hmm.
hoping you could kind of talk to that.
Yeah. So mind you, like the crazy part for me, and a lot of people, they say, oh, domestic violence victims, those that don't really understand. My father never hit my mother. He never hit me out of anger or rage. It was mostly like disciplinarian actions. So I came from a very good family. My father was an NYPD detective, and yeah, we had our own family dysfunctions, like all family does. But abuse wasn't part of it. So I ended when I was with my boyfriend at the time, and we were together. He was my best friend, and then he started doing steroids, and then that's when the abuse started to happen. And it started verbally, and then it became physical, and I was just like a shell of a person. Like I went inward because I think that feeling of feeling different, I started feeling like automatically it was a bad thing because I was different and having that misplaced rage. I was more reactionary, and I wouldn't think before I spoke. So I would, it was just not. My father used to always say, think before you speak. And I didn't know how to. I couldn't. It was like, it was just like, "Bleh, bleh," and I'm like, ah. So I think with also in my relationship, it was like we would argue, and I didn't think, not that I deserved to get hit, but I had to think back to going back to what you asked me. I feel that there is always a responsibility, and something happens that you allow when you're in an abusive relationship. So I had to go back. Part of my healing was, what was it that you could have not done or fixed or done better or recognized for yourself, not for him. I took the focus off of him. And I said, when did it start and why did I allow it? Because at the end of the day, nobody can do anything without your consent. And I allowed it. So I'm like, why did I allow it? And I really had to dig deep into that part of it. And during it, I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. I didn't know it. It was later on that I realized during, which is why I mean, I prefer the term survivor than, abuse, because I've survived it because I took that power back. So by taking that power back, I sat back and I'm like, when did it start? What did I allow? And why did I allow it? And that was when I felt like, oh, I did this. Okay, I can change that. I don't have that doesn't have to, I don't have to play out this narrative the way that it's going. It can change. And that's when I realized, oh, but it was hard
Was it
during.
codependency?
Oh, it was codependency, but it was also this dysfunction that I had within myself prior to the relationship because of feeling different and feeling like things were my fault, or I should be better, and nothing was ever good enough because I wasn't accepted the way that I felt I needed to be accepted, or I should be accepted. It was all in inner stuff. And so I think it kind of trickled over into that, but he also was doing steroids that I didn't know about, and everybody in the neighborhood was like, "Oh, he's on steroids, he's on steroids." And I'm like, I didn't know anything about steroids. I was like, "How? He's in the gym 4 hours a day. Like, I don't understand." And then I realized, oh, you have to be in the gym. I didn't know, you know what I mean? So it started with the verbal stuff. He became extremely jealous, extremely insecure, and extremely controlling. And then it became abusive. And I'll never
Yeah.
forget, it started with, we were just having an argument, and I went to open the door and I grabbed it, and he pushed it closed on my finger, and I lost my nail because he shut. That was the first. That was, and I remember it. It was the first sign of like injury, of hurting me. And I was like, and it was an accident. I didn't mean to do it, and then it kind of went from there. And then
Hmm.
it was like, I think that was what, oh, I didn't mean to do it. And I'm like, okay, that's my fault. I shouldn't have put my hand there. And then it was making the excuses for, oh, it was my fault. I upset him. Oh, I need to, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
I'm bad. I'm bad. And it was like that constant feeling of being bad. But it's also, I think is with children and upbringing, and you got to understand this, very different. My father also was a disciplinarian. So it was, my father's also had me when he was 40 years old. So my parents are older than most kids' parents my age. My dad was very old school. He was raised around boys. So when I say I wasn't, I was raised as a human, meaning my father never looked at, oh, the girl gets treated like this, the boy gets treated like this. It was like, no, you're gonna be treated as a human. So if you make a mistake, you're gonna pay the consequences. So this is the mistake, this is the rules. You break the rules, these are the consequences. And my dad was hard as nails on that. And so for me, I broke a lot of rules because I was
Hmm.
the rule breaker. And so I dealt with a lot of consequences. And I just automatically said, then there was times though where that reaction, I didn't mean to, but I did it because I was so reactionary that it was like, oh, I'm just bad. Does that
Right.
make sense? Because I couldn't
Right.
control it. And that's where the ADHD comes in and the impulsivity. And I'm like, I didn't, like, why did I do that? And then it was like, were you testing the waters? Are you pushing
Hmm.
the envelope? And then the personality. And obviously, what leads me to become a fighter, it all kind of makes sense in hindsight, you know?
Yeah. Um, Before we actually like get into walking to the back of the gym and one of these
Hmm.
hinge moments, but like you even like to get that sense of control back. I mean, you even developed anorexia. I mean, you had an eating disorder at that time.
Yes. Yes. I felt that if I looked better for him, I would be better because maybe it's, oh, he's a gym guy. And I felt like I was fat and ugly. Like what I saw in the mirror was not what everyone else saw. And
Hmm.
that's where the body dysmorphia started. And then the anorexia started. Mind you, I never was a heavy child because I was so active. And my
Right.
parents had me in like every sport. They were like, what do we do with all her energy? Just to give you an idea, when I was little, my mom tells this story. She's like, oh, she would do laps after dinner and we just let her run around the house. Just she had to burn off. And I think that's why my brother and I didn't really connect because he was like, Ma, what's wrong with her?
Yeah.
So, but my mom understood it because my mom had a lot of energy as well. So, yeah, I started to, I was working at the time. I was working and going to college, and I just stopped eating and I started taking diet pills. I mean, back
Hmm.
then you had ephedra, you had stacker twos, and they would just, not make me want to eat. And I
Yeah.
went down to about 112, 10, 12 pounds. And then I had to have emergency gallbladder surgery. I lost my gallbladder. I had to have emergency surgery because I had a fully infected gallbladder, and they said if I would have waited, I would have had sepsis and I could have died.
Right.
So yeah, I felt so like I just stopped eating, and then I started seeing the scale numbers go down, and it was like, oh. And but it's funny, I felt the difference in my clothing because I saw clothes were fitting me different, but the image of myself, that internal, it
Right.
was still external.
I know that's what's fascinating about it. I had in grad school one time when you speak of like, so we talk about drugs get more powerful, right? These are one of the drugs that, man, it was more powerful back in the day because the real ephedrine, like I had it one time, Maureen, one time. I think it might have been like the stacker too.
News.
And I remember like my roommate had, I'm like, oh, I'll try these. And I went and I worked out and then got done working out and then went to night class. And I remember sweating
Wedding.
in class, and my heart is still beating so fast. I'm like, okay, this can't be good. You know what I mean? That was the last time I took it because it scared me. And I mean, it's just
Well,
sweating.
yeah, you feel like you're crawling out of your skin. And I was doing it. I was doing one, I did ephedra. I don't think I liked the stacker too, but the ephedra was like more, but for me, it was more not even the working out, it was more the not eating. It
Right,
was more
right.
like, oh, look, like I literally was eating like a half I think in a day, I would have like a very small bowl, like a cup of cereal, a half a sandwich, and maybe like a rice cake with peanut butter at night. Like, I
Hmm.
mean, I'm talking less than like 500 calories a day.
Right, right.
And I'm still like, and I'm going.
Yep. Um, I don't like to insert myself into like the podcast itself. I like to leave the stage for you, but I never get to tell that in veteran story. So,
Yeah.
you know,
It's like, yeah, I know, right? Because
yeah.
people don't remember like back then. And I mean, remember the baseball players?
Oh yeah.
That's when they banned it. They
Yeah.
banned
Yeah.
it because of the pitchers, I think. And somebody was having a heart attack, or it was getting like out of control. And then I remember that. Yeah.
So, and you mentioned this, but by God's grace, you walked into the back of the gym. This hinge moment
Yeah.
of being immersed then into boxing. Walk us through that.
So I was going to this gym, Omni Health and Fitness, located in Mount Vernon, New York. And I remember I told my mom, I'm like, I want to go to the gym. Like my mom was like, God bless my mother. She's so amazing. And she said prayer got her through everything with me. And because me and my dad were like this, and so she knew I wanted to work out. So first she got me a membership to this Susan Marlowe. this gym, which I don't know if you remember those back in the day. They were only
Mm-mm.
females. It was an
Okay.
only female gym. You walk in, it was like the color of Pepto Bismol all over the place, like
Nice.
pink. And I remember I was a tomboy growing up, and so I was like, no, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna go here. So then there was a gym next door, and I started going there. Now, just so I can explain, like my parents, it wasn't like, because a lot of people say, well, didn't your parents realize? Didn't they see? And I'm like, they didn't. I used to wear baggy clothes, even with the abuse. I had, it was not visible, like they couldn't tell. Plus, my mother was, my father worked a lot, with being on the NYPD, and then he had other jobs after that. But my mom was like, whatever it was to keep me active and keep me moving was the best.
Right.
So she brought me to this gym, and she was like, okay, like you want to join this gym? And I said, yeah. So I joined the gym. I started working out, and then I remember there was a in the back, I just saw these guys going in the back. And I'm like, what's back there? I never been back there. I walked in the back and there was a boxing ring. And I remember looking at this. Now, rewind to the first time that I ever saw boxing was when I think I was like 15. It was when Mike Tyson bit Evander Holyfield's ear.
Yep.
And I wasn't watching the fight. I was at a friend's house, and his dad was having a fight party, and we were all hanging out in the kitchen. And all of a sudden, everybody in the living room was like, "Oh my God!" Like it was craziness, like mayhem. So we
Okay.
all ran in there, like, "What's going on?" I can visually see it. I sat down in this chair. It was like an ottoman chair, and I just watched the replay and I was like what? And it wasn't the actual act that attracted me. It
The
was like
rage.
the rage. I was like, I
Yeah.
connected, and I was like, I like the impulsivity, the reaction. I was like, what is this? And I knew who Mike Tyson was just from, like, rap songs and things like that. But I'm sitting there and I'm like, and after that, I was like, man. So when I walked into the back, I remembered that. And I was like, oh, I know this. And then a trainer came up to me, Willie Soto, and he said, do you want to try? And I was like, yeah. And then I'm thinking, like, how am I going to connect with these men? He had a Spanish accent. So I was like, oh, let me speak to him in Spanish. So I started speaking to him in Spanish, and he's like, oh, how do you speak Spanish? I said, oh, well, I'm Mexican and Irish. And he looked at me and he goes, you're going to be a world champion. And I was like, I didn't even know what he was talking about. I was like,
Hmm.
okay, no idea what that meant. And then that's when I started training.
Yep. Love that. Because I was a huge Evander Holyfield fan.
Yeah.
Loved Evander Holyfield and was never a
Yeah.
big Mike Tyson fan. And the
Mhm.
reason why it's funny because we have these glimpses, these snapshots throughout our life that give us like, wow, that was interesting. And I
Yeah.
call
Like
them
they hit
hinge,
you.
and I call them hinge moments. But the thing about Evander Holyfield is, I remember like in the early '80s, they had these superstars of sport that would compete in. You take like the best athletes in all these different sports. You couldn't do your own sport, but they'd have them run, they'd have them bike, they'd have them swim, row. You'd
Oh,
cycle,
wow.
and they
Yeah.
would all compete. And what Evander Holyfield, I remember watching. I'm a kid, right, Maureen?
Yeah.
And the 800, he does the 800. I'll even send this to you when we're done because
Yeah. Yeah. Please.
he runs this 800 and he sprints it. So after the first lap, like he's got a half lap lead. And I'm thinking like, oh my God, like this guy's incredible. And he ends
Yeah.
up holding on. But I was said, that's my guy. And I started rooting for him ever since that point.
Wow.
And
See that?
I was fortunate enough to meet him in Atlanta years
Oh, he
later.
fought. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I fought on his undercard.
oh, nice.
He fought Fresno Kendo at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, and I'll never forget when they called me up to the weigh, and that's when they gave me the name, the real Million Dollar Baby. They announced me there on that fight card as the real Million Dollar Baby. And like you said, there's nothing by accident. There's a whole other story on how I even got on that card, because I was self-promoted. And this was when women's boxing was nowhere near. That was in 2006.
Yeah. Do you want to share it?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
So, well, it kind of leads into Million Dollar Baby.
Okay.
So basically, I worked on Million Dollar Baby, and I had like a kind of a brush with the media. And I remember when they would ask me questions, I just told the truth. That's why, like, you can ask me anything, I'll tell you the truth. And that's what I knew. Like, I didn't. So I told them about my abusive relationship, all these different things. So my story was getting out there. They had a fight, an amateur fight in Manhattan at one of the ballrooms in Manhattan. I forgot which one. It was a really nice event, and it was the NYPD versus the FDNY.
Okay.
And I was invited to go there. So I went, and I remember the gentleman was like, oh, Maureen, go in and sit at any table you want. And I'm like, okay. So I looked around. I saw like these older men sitting at a table, and I just felt like, oh, let me go sit there because I'll be safe there. I'm like, they're nice older men. They were like, way older than me. I was like in my 20s. I think they were like in their 40s and 50s and older. So I know that's older now because that's what we are, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, I
So I
get
go
it.
and I sit down, and there was a gentleman next to me, and he was like talking to me. And I was always very humble, and I never I never like, again, I was still struggling with my self worth, believe it or not, during that time. Here I am on every news station, Access Hollywood, all these things, and I'm winning fights as an amateur, and I'm still like, do I belong here? I'm not
Hmm.
worthy, you know? So I'm sitting at this table, gentleman's next to me, and he started talking to me, and he's like, oh, do you box? I said, yeah, I box. Like, I didn't make a big deal about it. And they were announcing people into the ring, like, special guests, champions. So they're announcing everybody in the ring, and then all of a sudden they didn't announce me, and I didn't think anything of it because, again, I didn't think it was anybody. And then all of a sudden say, oh, we have a very special guest here today, and and they started talking, and I was like, I think they're talking about me. And then they announced me by myself into the ring. And I was like, so then when I came out, I was signing a bunch of autographs and taking pictures. And then I sat back at the table, and the gentleman looked at me, he goes, why didn't you tell us who you were? And I was like, I did. And he was like,
Right.
so like, wow, by my, like, blown away by my humility. And he asked me, he's like, do you want to go pro? And and he asked me those questions. I said, well, yeah, I mean, if that's the next step, because I was so I mean, I'll use the word naive, but I didn't know. I didn't grow up with boxing. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I think so. And he said, okay, well, I'm going to make a phone call to a gentleman. Do you know Murad Muhammad? And I said, no, because I knew nothing about boxing. He's like,
Hmm.
well, he's the one who discovered Manny Pacquiao and brought him to the United States. And I said, okay. He said, he's also worked with Evander Holyfield and all these different fighters, and he's a promoter. And we're going to get you on a card, one of his cards. He called Murad, put me on the phone with him. And Ramaha was like, oh, I heard these things. But he's like, okay. He's like, I'm going to promise you that I'm going to put you on one of my cards. I said, okay, mind you, I hadn't turned pro yet.
Right.
So now we're going, I think I turned pro in 2005. So then 2006, this was like 2023, I think, four. Sure enough, 3 years later, I get the call, and Warren Flagg was the individual I was talking to. Warren called up. I introduced him to Luigi, who was my coach and then became my manager. And the rest is history. Murad Muhammad, who a lot of people didn't like in boxing, he had a meeting. He said, I'd like to have a meeting with you and your representative. And I said, okay. And it was my manager, my Luigi. And we met him, and we sat there. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He looked at me and he says, you're very smart. He goes, you're beautiful. He goes, I normally, and again, women's boxing wasn't that big. So he's like,
Right.
what's interesting about you? He goes, I know you don't need to do this. The fact that you want to do this means you're special. And honestly, that moment was like, is that what it is? You know what I mean? Because I don't need
Mm.
to box. I wanted it so bad. And then I was like, wow, it like hit me when he said that. And I was like, you know what? He's right. Because I went through so much backlash and resistance from coaches, from other fighters, men, because, before I trained in Gleason's, I mean, I was like looked at as like, oh, the pretty small girl. Like, she's not,
Right.
I didn't have the muscles I have today. I didn't have, it was like, oh, and back then, women's boxing, the Christy Martin. Christy was the only people knew Christy Martin, Layla Ali, Jackie Frazier, kind of, and
Right.
Lucia Riker, and like that was the only four names that, and Ann Wolf when she knocked out Vonda Ward, but like that's it. And they weren't accessible. I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't like, we didn't have what we have today. So I really discovered everything on the job.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't grow up with boxing. I didn't, and I thought like and back then, a lot of girls were lesbians. So I was like, well, I'm not a lesbian, but I'm good at this. I had like identity crisis. Like, I didn't
Sure.
understand. I like genuinely was like, but I don't have tattoos. I don't fit whatever box they're trying to put me in. But then they judged me when I first started. It was like, oh, I remember, I'll tell you this story. When I went to Gleason's, the first time that I went to Gleason's gym. So when I started boxing, I trained with Willie Soto, the gentleman that I told you asked me if I wanted to try. And then during that time, Willie was really busy. He was older. He was very busy with male fighters, professionals. So I had became friends with one of the fighters in the gym, Louis Rosado. And Louis was he did very well. I think he was a 135 pounder. He fought Vince Petway. He fought Kermit Cintron. And Louis and I became friends. And he kind of like, I said, I know he saw the talent in me. And he was
Hmm.
like, I don't think Willie's gonna have time for you. So maybe we have to find you another coach. So I said, okay.
That when Hector came in?
Well, no.
Oh,
Oh, no, you don't even know. I mean, yes, this is leading to that.
okay.
But it was like, oh, I mean, I had to fight to get even, this is what part of the discrimination part of it, where I was
Yeah.
like, so I remember I went to a couple different gyms with him. And then, but one guy was like, oh, I had already been boxing for like 6 months. And I was sparring with the guys, like they were playing like Elvia Mariki back then, Antonio Oliveros. These are all like, we trained, they were in the gym. I mean, David Telesco, I'm going back to like the names people may not know, their New York scene. Like I didn't spar with David, but I sparred with like a lot of these guys would get in and play around with me, like to have fun, and the coach Willie would like, they knew they weren't going to beat me up or do anything to me. So we started looking for coaches, and I went to one guy in Yonkers, and he was like, "Oh, you got to work the floor before you can spar." And I had already been sparring, and I was like, "Okay, we're not going to go here." And then I remember we went to another gym. It wasn't a competitive gym. And then I remember I went to Morris Park Boxing Gym on my own, and I'll never forget this. I knocked on the door, and Jim Borzel was running the gym at the time because it was DeGuardia's like ran it. And so I knocked on the door, and Jim Borzel, who was a matchmaker, he opened the door, and I just said, "Hi, I'm a boxer and I'm looking for a boxing gym to train in." He looked at me and he goes, "Well, you don't look like a fighter. I don't think we have anything for you here." Wouldn't even let me into the gym.
Yeah.
And I just kind of looked at him. A side note, 4 years later, he was matchmaking my fights at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah. Love it.
So I'm just giving you the
Maureen, that's
idea of that.
Maureen, that is like, but that was what Million Dollar Baby was all about as well. When you watch that movie, I mean, same thing with
Very
Hilary Swank,
similar.
right? I mean,
Very similar. Uh-huh.
wanted to do that. Dude, that's awesome. I want to parlay it into this. I mean,
Yeah.
let's talk about faith because I look at faith like, and you said this as well, and I'm holding on to your quotes. I'm a big quotes honk here, champ.
Yes.
But
I love them.
God's
Yes.
dreams for yourself are larger than your own.
Yes.
And like, I'm always interested in these moments because if you didn't sit at that table, let's say you sit at another
That's
table,
right. That's right.
everything is
No
different.
coincidences. That's right. And
Talk
if I wasn't
about,
who I was, though, if I wasn't the person that
right,
just, if
right.
I didn't have that low self-esteem, if I didn't feel like I was lucky to be there.
And so like, and I know one of your favorite quotes is Jeremiah 29:11, but
Yes.
what about that verse of be still and know that I am God?
Yes.
Um, but just talk about like through all your experiences. I mean, you leave the hospital, your parents take you to the church right away. I mean,
Yeah.
how is this role of faith though incorporated and just been the cornerstone of your life?
My mother and my father always told me the stories of that they prayed for me, that I wasn't an accident. Because, when you have the kid who's 10 years younger than the first, it's like, oh, you were an accident. My mom always made it a point to say, no, you weren't an accident. We prayed for you. And I knew I prayed to God to have a girl. And when I was pregnant with you, I didn't know what you were yet. But when everybody would come over, how's the baby? And she's like, no, I would tell them it's Maureen. Her name is Maureen and she's a girl. And they're like, how do you know? Because when God delivers, he delivers all the way when he answers your prayers. And so though I call that being rooted. I was really rooted through birth into, instilling the plans that the Lord has for me and trusting in God. And even obviously as humans, we have those moments where we forget about God. We forget that God's there. And then we have to remember, no, I'm okay. And God sends us little messages, but you have to be aware of them and you have to see them. And you don't realize sometimes while it's happening that he's there. You think, and that's where I think knowing it's not all you, it's God, and trusting that. And so for me, I think all of it, it's like, I mean, I should be dead. I shouldn't be alive. I was suicidal. I went through depression. I was suicidal. I was on multiple antidepressants and mood stabilizers. And I wanted to kill myself. And God stopped me where one time I was driving my car and I called my mom and I had to pull over and I said, I want to drive my car off the road and I need help. And I feel like I thank God I had that, to stop and help and ask. And because I knew God had a greater plan for me and I
Mhm.
didn't want to disappoint God. And so that has carried me so much through my life and my career in those moments. And I still have them where I'm like, I'm afraid. I'm a fear of the future of where is this going to go? Why am I doing this? Where am I going? And learning how to just be still and know that I have a higher power that's bigger than myself, that always had a plan for my life. Because when I look back at my life, how can I not be grateful? And I never dreamt of being a world champion. I never dreamt of working on an Oscar award winning film. I never dreamt of fighting in the garden, Vander Holyfield's undercard. Oh, I mean, I could go having dinner with Roberto Duran, like Joe Frazier showing me how to jab. I can go on and on and on moments in my life that are just exceptional moments. George Foreman hugging me and telling me he believes in me. Like, his book, God in My Corner, it's a
Mhm.
wonderful book if you haven't read it. Has completely like had changed my life. I would take the train to Gleason's. I would take a bus and three trains to Gleason's to train from the Bronx, and I would read that book and keep staying submerged and connected to books of faith and people of faith and going through that and the healing process and just remembering that God is greater than everything. That's what carried me and it still does. And I would lie if I didn't say like there's moments where I'm like I need to get closer to God because it's God is always home. It's us that leave the house
Mhm.
and he's always there. We have to remember to go back because to not have a faith or not have something bigger than yourself to give it to and keep you accountable and keep you on your toes, it's hard. That's
Yeah.
hard.
No, I thank you for sharing that, Coach. And you put it great. I mean, so the question that comes to my mind is, um, you're turning professional. You have trained Hillary Swank. You were the top sparring partner. But I kind of want to go past that because one of the things you said was, I mean, still the self-esteem wasn't there, right? And one of the things I
No,
always get
oh,
back to is you can't outperform your own self-esteem.
no, no. It was
When did that finally start to like, hey man, I am worthy and this is something I can do?
You're really gonna. This is really good. Let me grab my dog because he's crying. My emotional support animal. So, man, it was a long road. Like, I mean, and people are surprised when I say this. I had already won my first world title, and I remember when I won my first world. I'll rewind. When the first time it was just to explain, just so the listeners can understand how bad it was. When I won my first amateur fight, I looked at the ref and I said, I really lost, didn't I? Because I didn't believe that I won. That's how
Mhm.
bad I felt about myself. And I remember he looked at me like, because I looked at him, he raised my hand. I was like, I really lost, didn't I? And I was like, why would I say that? But that's me with that's just how I felt about myself. I didn't think I was worthy of anything. And then when I won my first world title, I just didn't have a connection to the belt. I didn't feel like it was just okay, you did it. And then it was like, but you're a world champion. And I was like, I don't even know what that means.
Right.
Like, you know, and then
Well, Coach, Champ, when that happens, like, um, people are patting you on the back, telling you how great you are. Like, what did it feel like inside then?
I just, it wasn't even like it's not like I don't think I felt a connection. It's almost like, okay, okay, it felt good, but then you know what it was? It felt good in the moment, but I still had that inner issue.
Hmm.
I still had to do the work. Because look, it's like you could win the lotto. It doesn't mean everything's better. People think stuff doesn't make things better. If in here you have to have that in here. If you don't have that in here, outside, like you can have, I mean, listen, I know because when I was like clinically depressed, I had a brand new Acura TL. I was on every news day. I was doing all this $1 million baby. Everything was great. Finances were great. Guess what? I didn't care. I didn't feel good. That's when I learned that was like in 2005. I was like, wow, like stuff doesn't make you feel better. It's just
Hmm.
stuff. It was the battle inside. So I'd have to say it wasn't until like I had to like because it was a lot of work. I did a lot of work on myself throughout my life. Like I was in therapy since I was 7. There's something I didn't talk about. My dad was diagnosed bipolar when I was 2. So my dad struggled, and I had, my dad was emotionally unavailable at times, and the bipolar disorder. Because when I look back at how I ended up in an abusive relationship, I think a big part of it, and it's not my dad's fault. He was sick. I think that I lacked that emotional connection with a man in my
Mm,
dad. And I knew my dad loved me and my dad was a great provider, but there wasn't that like, I'm proud of you, honey, or things like that. I think my dad more had fear, like he didn't want to screw me up because I was a girl and he was raised around boys and he had my brother. So I think that's part of it. And then for me, it was like just doing the work. So being in therapy since I was like 7, that I remember, and then continuing with therapy even today, constantly just holding myself accountable and doing the work and even my own therapy. You know, I guess it wasn't until I moved to California. I just did so many things to heal. Because when I moved to California, it wasn't for boxing; it was to heal. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal that they wrote about me. Tim Smith wrote an article. If you Google it, and I talk about depression and seasonal affective disorder and how I knew that I went from New York and then I was in New Jersey and I was working at the time. I was running a beautiful gym, a 16,000 square foot full function training facility, state of the art, and I was running it. And I went to Mexico to film a reality show, and then I never went back because I said, if I go back to Jersey, I'm going to die. And people were like, I'm like, no, 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 this is going to die. Because
mm,
I was staying like this in this. And that's when I developed compulsive eating and I was 180 pounds. And I was just, so when I moved I said, I'm going to go to California and I took a leap of faith. A lot of my life has been a leap of faith. And if I didn't have that faith in knowing that I was going to be caught, no matter what, I'm going to be okay.
right.
I took that leap and I'm okay. And then I think that's when I started to realize, like, Maureen, look at the steps you've done because you can't like predict the steps. You can't. So it was by stepping in my purpose and taking the steps and stepping past fear and just keep stepping, keep showing up. That's where that self worth started to build. And it's like, well, look, you're proving it to yourself. How much more do you want? It was almost like
Mhm.
God talking to me, like, look, look. And I'm like, okay, like I belong here. I did this. I deserve this. And I kept stepping and stepping into my purpose now. I've got to say, at 44 years old, I'm in the best place I've ever been. And that's not to say I don't still have my moments, but they don't last as long because
Mhm.
I know what they are now. I'm
Right.
aware. And I think that self-awareness developed and through taking those steps and stepping outside of my comfort zone and being okay, being uncomfortable, but understanding what's healthy discomfort and unhealthy discomfort. Because I think there's so much of both that people need to understand which is good and which is bad. Because the abusive
Right.
relationship, uncomfortable, unhealthy discomfort. Stepping into a boxing gym, having pain and healthy discomfort.
Right. And plus, like, your identity now.
And I think that, yes, and that's such a great point because, and I don't, and I say this so like, I don't care. I don't care what people think. I don't care what people say. I don't care. I probably care more about people and not that what they think of me, but I care more about not the likability, but I care more about them being okay and them doing because I see the good in people. I try to see because I remember when I couldn't see the good in myself and some people couldn't see the good in me. And I look for the good in people and I try to help them see that good and
Yeah.
learn from that good and look at and see how much growth, and even if they don't see it in themselves, it's a big thing for me when it comes to the mentoring and even the self-talk. I try to tell people, like, watch the words you say to yourself because I once spoke to myself horribly for years. And I used to have post-its on my wall in my bathroom telling me, you're valuable, you are loved, you are beautiful. Because I needed that reminder every morning to look at it because I didn't believe it. So I had
Yeah.
to fake it till I made it.
Yeah. Champ, what specific about boxing? Like when you were in that ring, And when things get hectic, I mean, if you get tagged by one, your strategy's not working out. Talk to us about what do you remember about one of those moments that, I
Oh,
mean,
you want a good or a bad moment?
I want both, but I want which one your heart's telling you to share.
Oh, the bad one. The hardest moment of my life. I mean, I've had quite a few, but I was fighting. So with that, when Moran Muhammad put me on the I'm sorry, the Evander Holyfield card, it drew a lot of eyes on me, and I got a lot of attention. So Warren Flagg also had a relationship with Bob Arum, and he got me a meeting with Bob Arum to share my story and try to get me on the card. So I remember I had a meeting with Bob Arum with my
Mm.
manager, and I came with a folder full of like highlight reels, photos, bio, everything. And we went to his hotel, and we had a meeting with him. And my manager at the time, Luigi, who's still my manager, let me speak. And I said, we were talking, and Bob was so like against women boxing because he didn't see the market for it back then, and he was going to put Christy Martin to fight Lucia Riker, but then Lucia Riker got hurt, and he lost a lot of money in the marketing, and he just wasn't interested. And I remember I just spoke to him honestly, and I said, "Well, I'm not Christy Martin or Lucia Riker. I'm Maureen Shea, and I can tell you that who my fans are." I said, "Not only will the men come, but the women will come, and the women will bring their children." I said, "So I can just tell you that." He didn't even open up the file. He said, "Okay." And he put me on Miguel Cotto's undercard to fight for my first world title, which was the WBA 130-pound world title. And it was a hard thing for me because part of the journey I was training with Hector Roca at the time, and Luigi Olcese, who became my boxing coach, brought me to Hector. He became my manager. But Hector Roca, and this is the ugly truth of boxing, Hector Roca chose to go to Belgium with a male fighter, and he
In
didn't
the
work my
middle, in
corner.
the middle of your training?
Correct.
Wow.
So I fought for my first world title without my coach.
How far out?
Oh, he left 2 weeks because it was in Philippines. It
Oh my
was
goodness.
he was yeah, it was in the Philippines. And you know, I just all I knew was resiliency. That's one thing that nobody can take away from me is how
Right.
resilient I am.
Right.
And so I didn't think anything of it because again, I was still struggling with the self-esteem. So I'm like, oh, okay, he's gonna go. Yeah, because I don't deserve to have a coach in my corner for my first world title. Like that's how I felt. So to me, it wasn't a big deal. So it was like, okay, I just got to do what I got to do. And my manager at the time, Luigi, he didn't want to lose the opportunity, so he prepared me the best he could. He worked my corner because he was my boxing coach in the beginning, and I know he wanted the best for me. And again, this was a time during women's boxing where this was a huge opportunity. I couldn't lose it, you
Right.
know. So I remember taking the fight, going to weigh-ins. ESPN aired the weigh-in, like everything was a big deal at the press conference. Miguel Cotto, like this was a Miguel Cotto. Miguel Cotto was just learning English, and I addressed the media in English and in Spanish. And then when I left, Miguel came up and he goes, "I gotta follow that." In Spanish, he said it. You know what I mean? So it was kind of
Yeah.
like, and I remember he fought Michael Jenkins, and I actually still speak to Michael's wife. Her and I became close. And so anyway, in that fight, in the fourth round, I blew my eardrum, and I was struggling because I didn't know I blew my eardrum. So I dropped her in the first round with a left hook. And she was significantly bigger than me. I was fighting at 130, which was a big weight class for me, but you
Okay.
take the opportunities where you can. And so I got hit with the left hook. And I mean, she got hit with the left hook. She went down. And then she didn't like me on the inside. So she grabbed my head, like to hold me on the inside, and she cupped my ear. And it wasn't on purpose, and it blew my eardrum. So I didn't even know I had a blown eardrum, and I just heard whoosh, whoosh, as I was fighting. And then I remember she hit me with a shot, and I felt like I deserved it. That was the moment. I got hit, and I was like, look, you're shit.
Mm.
After I dropped her, and I don't know if it was because I blew my eardrum, but it was that moment where I had to fight out of that. The fight wasn't physical, it was in here. And I was
Right.
like, it was like the angel and the devil on both sides, and I fought back. So I think it was the fourth round. I fought 5 rounds or 6 rounds with no equilibrium. It was pure muscle memory and will. It was 30 seconds in the final round that I got hit and I fell over. I couldn't stand up anymore. So if you look on Google Images, there's a picture of me on the canvas, and I look so confused because I didn't even know why I was on the floor. I wasn't hurt. I just couldn't stand up. And when
Right.
I got up, the ref saw my eyes, but he looked at me, he goes, you okay? And he went like this, and I stepped forward, and he stopped the fight. 30 seconds, the final round of my first world title fight,
Hmm.
and I lost the fight.
If it went to the card, how would it have gone?
I don't know. I have to watch it. It was tough. I don't know. I got to look back. I
Yeah.
don't even remember. I don't know. I mean, maybe a draw, maybe a loss. I don't know. All I know is like, to me, that didn't even matter. To me, it was like because I had stopped. I think one of the questions at the Blue Ocean Summit that we did, it was that fight that I had in mind, about the losses, because it didn't matter that I lost. It was what I fought through that mattered.
Right.
And I was like, I didn't know. So after the fight, it was funny. I'm close with Chuck Zito, and his sister Roseanne is a good friend of mine. And so Chuck Zito was there, and I remember he walked me to the ring like he did with Arturo, and I walked to the locker room, and Danny Milano was my cut man, Luigi and Chuck were in the locker room, and I went to sit on one of the chairs, and I fell off the chair, and they looked at me because I had no depth perception.
Right.
So and I wasn't hurt. Like I know I wasn't like hurt. I was just like not. I was like, whoa, like I just didn't feel right. And so when they took me to the hospital, they did the X-ray, and they said she has a hole in her eardrum, like
Hmm.
not a slit, like a hole. And and then I remember after that fight, the vision of her with the belt and the celebration, and I was like, this was my shot. Bob Arum wanted to sign me, like this was my shot, and it just. And then yeah, I mean so back to your question, um in the moment of that fight where I felt like I deserved to get hit, because nobody knew my struggles back then.
Right.
Like nobody really understood like how I can talk about it now. Um but it was hard. That was the fight for me. So that's why after that fight, I'm like, okay, what's next? And then I went and I fought another fight, and guess what? I lost again. So I had back-to-back losses. That second fight, there was a lot of things. And Hector Roca, God rest his soul, he taught me a lot of things, but he was a very difficult man. And he was a big challenge to work with. And my second fight, I don't think I was prepared correctly for the fight. I sparred with a southpaw boxer. I was fighting an orthodox puncher, and there were a lot of things. And
Yeah.
I fought that fight, and I felt in that fight. I remember him telling me like, if I told you walk straight in with your hands up, and I looked at him, and he was like, if you don't listen, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. What coach says that in a corner to a
Hmm.
fighter? I feel like honestly, and it wasn't just Hector, they were just people that God placed in my life for different reasons. And it wasn't, for whatever reason Hector said that to me, I still felt like I wasn't worthy. I still felt like, yeah, I don't deserve to be, I wasn't, I didn't, and I was never somebody that needed the applause. I just was a worker. I
Right.
worked, I worked, I worked, but I felt like nothing was ever good enough. But it's like, of course, nothing's ever good enough. Nothing's ever good enough for you, for anybody, for you. So you got to keep working. But it was that self-esteem that created my discipline,
Yep.
that created the person I am today.
A question for you. What a boxer trainer once said this one time, and I was asking him like, how do you know the boxers are mentally tough? What is that you see? And he said when they get beat, but then they show up the next day. He said that's the
Oh,
only time I can tell when they're tough.
yeah.
It
And
speaks to your resiliency.
and the thing is, I didn't, well, yeah, and I knew I was always like, even in school, like growing up, like I look back now and I'm like, I always had this toughness, but also this struggle inside. So it was like this weird counterbalance. It was like you're tough, but you lack self-esteem. But I wasn't a bully. I got bullied when I was younger. You know what I mean? I never bullied, but it was like this whole like weird, but I think that that's just who I am, and that's how I was created to be. And even today, it's a little different because you see a lot of these fighters now with the undefeated, and people ask me, "What do you think about this fighter, that fighter?" Mostly the women, because obviously I'm,
Hmm.
I'm, a, I'm a woman. So I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, we'll see when they get beat. If they get beat, we'll see when they hit hard waters. Injuries. I fought with a torn ligament. I fought with one hand, 5 rounds. I fought with a blown eardrum, broken noses, fractured shoulders. Like, I'm not saying that I wish that to happen to these girls, but that's when you're going to see. But nowadays, I don't know if it's different. It's just, I feel like things are different nowadays. Like, things are a little more, I don't know if women are having to fight the hard fights like we had to fight. It's a
Hmm.
little bit more kind of like set up for them. Where, I was brought up, I learned, remember, I had 12 amateur fights. So
Right.
I learned on the job. So I was brought up a certain way, but the fights that I had, my manager never put me in with somebody that was going to lay down, because what was that going to do for me? That wasn't going to make me any better.
Right. Right.
So,
No, I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you a question. Um, I liked Meldrick Taylor growing up, and Meldrick Taylor had won the gold medal in the
yep,
Olympics.
of course.
So he fights Julio Cesar Chavez.
Yeah.
And he was ahead on the cards. But similar to your kind of situation, he got tagged. There was 10 seconds left and Richard Steele calls it, right?
Yeah.
And I always remember that. And I was like,
Yep.
they robbed him, like they cheated him. They should have, like, how could
Let
they
it
do
finish.
that? And then it falls out. But the one thing that was interesting from that is Meldrick Taylor was never the same. And I always felt for him. And I remember a commentator, and it might have been some of you probably alongside, right?
Mhm.
Might have been Bornstein or something like that. But it was like,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I worked with
he
him.
said, once it's beaten out of you, it's gone forever. And just from asking like a boxer that question, do you agree with that statement, or like what's the thought on that?
So you mean like once it's beaten, man, I think that there's bigger fights that we don't know about that each fighter has in those moments. I think it's bigger. I don't think it's just, I think it's mental. And you don't know what Meldrick Taylor was going on in his personal life and what he had to
Right.
overcome. I think so much of what happens outside of the ring, and this is something that my manager Luigi would always say to me, because I was in college, because when I started boxing, my parents found out. My dad said, "In this house you have to work and go to school. You can't do all three." And I said, "Watch me." So
Watch me.
I
Right.
boxed for
Yeah.
like the first half of my career to prove my dad wrong. And then it was always proving. And then the second half, it was to prove that I wasn't just a sparring partner to Hillary Swank, that I'm a contender, I'm a prospect. So there was so much going on. I think that it depends on, like, if you feel it's worth it or not. It's really
Mm,
like the opinion of the person. And I think when fighters come back from those beatings, they're trying to prove something more to themselves. And I think that starts the cycle of the fighter never being able to retire and fighting beyond their prime. Because I don't believe the fight is the physical fight, it's the mental and emotional fight that they miss. And I think a lot of it has to do with maybe not healing in the other areas of your life. And which is why, I know for myself, I mean, I'm still an active fighter, but I always think about what it's gonna look like when I retire,
mhm.
because I think that's hard for any elite athlete or any athlete that's done anybody. I mean, think about, whatever your job is when you retire, if that's your identity. But I really, I think that's a big part. And back then, the Mildred Taylors, the Chavez's, I mean, that was their whole world. They didn't need to do anything else. So I mean, look at De La Hoya, what he went through. Do you know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Right.
Like, I mean, I'm not surprised that, I mean, all these fighters, I mean, even look at Ricky Hatton, God rest his soul. I mean, he struggled,
Yeah.
and that's painful. They all struggled. Arturo struggled.
Yeah.
Mickey Ward talks about it too. Mickey's great, but Mickey's very candid about it too. So I think it's individual. I think it all depends on the fighter and what they're dealing with outside and inside the ring. And you don't know what fighters go through outside the ring unless they tell you.
Yeah.
Fighters
That's
sometimes
right.
don't even know what it is. I'm
Right.
I'm fortunate enough to have done enough work to sit back and be like, oh, and it's like a blessing and a curse to be so self-aware. Sometimes it sucks. Sometimes ignorance is bliss,
Yeah,
but
and I agree, and but that's why I'm excited and I'm glad we had this conversation because you're able to not just give the surface answers, but really what's behind everything. And I think you articulate it right because I mean,
thank you.
you would never watch Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward fight one, two, and three and say, that's gonna be that's it, man. Like that's the highlight of it, because yeah, it was a shame, man. I mean, I always look at that fight like. Arturo Gatti, I forget which one it was, but just being a boxing fan, like watching Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward fight, it was like two people that absolutely knew each other, fought the same
Yep.
exact way,
Yep.
fighting each other. Who did you
So
like? Who did you like?
So funny story. I have a very close connection to both fighters,
Okay.
and those fights, I was actually ringside in Ward's corner for Gotti Ward one,
Wow.
like sitting front row ringside. And I knew Arturo just because Hector Roca had trained Arturo. And Buddy McGirt was in his corner, who I've also worked with. Buddy's a friend, and a great trainer, was a great fighter. And I remember that fight. And then Mickey, I'll never forget. I did after those fights. Was it before? It might have been before. No, it was after those fights. I was at Gotti Ward one. I didn't go to two, and I was at three.
Okay.
But I loved both fighters, and that was really hard for me because then I was part of this exhibit called the Fighting Irishman, and I was the only female featured in the exhibit. And they had my shorts and my glove from the Golden Gloves, and I was there, and I remember they had pictures of us to sign, a bunch of fighters, and Mickey was part of it. And I'll never forget, I was standing there, and I got a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, it was Mickey Ward with a picture of me asking me for my autograph.
Nice.
And I was like, oh, I remember when Mickey told me they were doing a movie about him. He's like, hey, Mark Wahlberg. Like, he was so excited. And he's such a great, he's such a great human. And so was Arturo. Arturo, I remember, came into I was giving an interview with Million Dollar Baby, and he was training at the gym. And he just came by to train. Because Hector wasn't working with him any longer. But he walked in and he came in and he goes, and Arturo was one of my favorite fighters before I knew Mickey. And he walked in and I was getting an interview and he goes, oh, you're Maureen. And I was like, and he shook my hand. I was completely starstruck. I told
Nice.
the interviewer that was interviewing me, I was like, hold on a second. I was like, that's my favorite fighter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was, besides Marvin Hagler, you know what I mean? Like, it was just the whole, that's another one.
Right.
But those fights, and I'm so blessed to have this experiences with both fighters. Those are some wars.
Because
And
Gotti had broken his hand in the third one, right?
Gotti always broke his hands. Like, he was
Yeah.
always like, and he always, but Arturo, there's a story that Arturo fought De La Hoya with like charms in his boot because his girlfriend had given them to him. Like, crazy stories. Like, and he was fighting with like some kind of in his boot, in his boxing shoe. You know what I mean? Like, but some of these fighters were just, they just did their own thing, and they were just such tough, resilient fighters. And that's just who they were. Paulie Malignaggi is a friend of mine, and I remember Paulie when he first started coming up, and I was at Paulie's fights during like the first four, like his one of his first four pro fights. I trained with him at Gleason's. I got an opportunity to spar with Paulie, and even him, Paulie was a different kind of fighter. When he fought
Hmm.
Cotto with the fractured orbital, and now he's doing bare knuckle, like, but that never leaves you.
Right.
He just fought, like, he's just a different, and you think they're crazy. Yeah, they are crazy. And if they're not going to tell you they are, they're even crazier. But
Yeah.
they're okay with it. That's just who they are,
Yeah.
you
No,
know?
I love it, champ. Like the round one, I think of Hagler Hearns too
Oh,
is an absolutely fantastic round of fighting. Um, I can take the Pepsi challenge across like all sports when it comes to like sports knowledge, but like these are just the little intricacies that I just pay attention to because I love them, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, champ, my question really is this is you know, with the experience that you shared, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you got to come on here and we could share
Yeah,
this
me too.
together.
Thank you.
Um, Coach, what question should I be asking that I'm not asking?
I think, what I try to tell people when it comes to, like, I know a lot of people ask me, like, how do you find your passion? Like, I'm so blessed that I found this. Like, could it have been something else? Just don't be afraid to try new things. Don't be afraid to, I think passion is in everybody. Just like I said, I think everybody's ultimately good. When you're born, you're a baby. A baby has no, like, you're not bad. You're good. So ultimately, there's good in you. And I believe through my faith that God created us to be good, but He also created us with free will. And we live in a very broken world. And there's a lot of things that pull you in different directions, but you can always go back to being good. But what does that look like for you? And what is it that can lead you there? I think ultimately people know good and bad. And it's not just a feeling, but it's something. And I think don't be afraid to try new things, whether it's a sport. I used to say when I do motivational speaking, and I'm like, I don't care if it's basket weaving. If it's something that everybody else doesn't think is cool, like, I hid boxing. I didn't want anybody knowing that. Even now, I lifted this. So I wear my glasses. People think I'm a school teacher. I don't even care because it's mine. It's for me. I mean, it's
Yep.
cool, but it's also what healed me. And I think for people just to go out there and just look at themselves and be like, what more can I do in my life that can make me feel alive? Whether it's sport or dancing was another thing. I think movement. And if you're struggling with like, depression or how to get started with working out, get up and go for a walk.
Right.
We're so lucky that we can get up and just go out. And that was the thing that carried me throughout my whole career, I think, was that I got up and I moved. Movement is medicine.
Hmm.
Just get up and move. And I know you may not feel it in the first day, the second day, maybe not even the 10th day, but you'll start feeling better. And if you don't feel it by the 10th day, there's something wrong, but you'll
See,
feel it.
I think though, coach, I think we notice the feeling right away, but I think what we want is we
We,
want to look better.
yes.
And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like when
Yeah.
that's going to take a long time, but it's the feeling that you have of, hey, man, the accomplishment of the blood flowing, of the movement, right? Being
Well, I think
outside
it's,
when you do
but
it,
I
you
think
know?
it's the emotion that the emotion though, because it's hard.
Yep.
So it's the emotion. It's like, and emotions are fleeting. Feelings are fleeting.
Hmm.
So just because it's hard doesn't mean it's gonna be hard the next day. It may
Right.
just be hard then. And when I had my eating disorder and I was binge eating at the time, I remember my manager actually said to me, and I went to Overeaters Anonymous, and it was another thing in Overeaters Anonymous that they talked about. You can start over every day. And it's not the
Yep.
day. Every second, every minute, you can start over. If you made a mistake, let it go. Stop punishing yourself for the mistakes of the past and look at what you can do going forward. And I think a
Hmm.
lot of people hold themselves in this past space, and or they don't think they're worthy, or they don't. Just do the next best thing that you can and
Yeah.
just try to do it well,
But
whatever it is.
then we kind of get back into the original point, right? It's the identity. Like if you knew what your identity was and that this is just something you struggle with, but it's not who you are, I think then the game and the battle then changes.
Yeah. And I think but that's also yeah, it's fear, false evidence appearing real. It's this thing that we tell ourselves. It's not even true. And we don't know what I mean, I'm a very much a forward thinker, but I do try to be present because I struggled with that. I think I went from thinking in the past to thinking too far in the future. But being present is probably it's hard. It's really, really hard. But the one thing that I learned from being present is to breathe.
Hmm.
Stop and take a breath because you can't breathe for the future and you can't breathe for the past. You can only breathe for the moment. And when I feel like I'm stop, and even like podcasts like this brings up a lot of shit, a lot of stuff, but it's okay. It's normal and that's human and it's okay. But I can breathe it out. I don't have to keep it here.
Yeah. Love it, coach. Thank you so much for the time and insight. I really, really appreciate that.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. Totally my pleasure. And everybody, you can follow me. I mean, if there's any of your listeners that have any questions or, and I'm totally accessible, on Instagram or Facebook, Maureen
Yeah.
underscore Shea, Maureen Shea. I'm on all that stuff.
We'll put
Maureen
all the
underscore
links
Shea.
on there. You got
Yeah,
it.
I'm on there. So yeah, and I'm an open book. It's how I've always told my story kind of just like this is who I am. And it's helped me, believe it or not, it's helped me to just be who I am and just, and if people judge me, that's on them because I love
Yeah.
who I am finally.
Thanks, champ.
My pleasure. Thank you.